Hi everybody, Dr. Pingle here. This is part 3 of a series on creating custom 3D prints. One of the things we've done so far is we've made a world elevation map. In part 2 we learned how to extract a piece of an elevation map. So we looked at the state of Iowa as an example and clipped out just the elevation values that we need for that, and then made a map of just that shape. What I want to do now is to take a step back and talk a little bit about how this process works and then how we could apply it to non-elevation data. I'm going to download this image. I just Googled flower image, black and white. We're going to save this image to our directory here. It's coming in as a JPEG. And if we come in here and do File, Open Files, one of the things that you'll notice is that there are a lot of supported files. So we've been working with PNG files as an input and STL files as an output, but this can load JPEG files. So we're going to highlight the one that we just loaded and hit OK. Now the same dialog box comes up. We still have to specify the height and the size. The lighter is higher in smoothing. But what I want to show you is that essentially it's going to take any image and it's going to print it out. And so anywhere where the image was white, we'll bring up this page here. Anywhere where this image was white, it's going to be tall, and anywhere where it's black, it's going to be low. And if you look at the print we just saw, that's exactly what you see. And you could crop this out using any kind of photo editing software. You could really make some really interesting images this way. What I want to do though is talk a little bit about how we can use this to map non-elevation data. So we're going to work with a raster, and you wouldn't have to work with a raster at all. But what I want to do is work with some of these radar data. This is radar data that's being archived by the Iowa State Mesonet. It's archiving all of this stuff. We'll get into some of the details here. We've got different kinds of radar that we can look at. Basically, as you move into this folder, you can start to pull some of this data out. If you wanted to look at, and maybe we'll do this and just look at a NextRad composite for now. If we look at some of these NextRad composites, sort of composite maps of radar all over the United States, we could look at individual storms and we could map those as well if we wanted to. And we could do this, again, for any kind of raster or vector data. All we need to do is to be able to output something that's black and white. So for instance, we could make a choropleth map and shade the states according to some value and print that out, and we would have a scaled 3D vector map of some process. But let's look how we might do this with weather data. We have two different kinds of data here, NOR and NOQ. These are sort of different resolutions of data. What we can do is just sort of look at the archive for today. And what you'll see here are values that are essentially time-stamped here by this is the kind of radar that you're working with, and then timestamp. So this is 2008. This is the 10th month of October and the 22nd. And we've got a timestamp here of midnight Greenwich Mean Time. So we could download this PNG file. We'd get something that looked like this. So we have some overexposed areas here on the eastern radar, but then we have some areas of storms over here on to the south. We can save this image. We can save it to our temp directory, and we could do the same thing with this WLD dataset and save that. So this is world file data. This is data that locates a particular place. Okay. And we can bring that in just like we would any other data source. So we're going to add some data here. Go back to our map view. So here's the data that we just downloaded. We're going to zoom to that layer and it looks something like this. Now, it actually didn't come in referenced correctly, and the reason is that a world file actually doesn't contain projection information. So we would have to correctly assign the projection to get this to work. But we don't need to fix that for this example. We can process this as it is. If we were to zoom in here, we would see a storm that looks like, or storm system that looks something like this. And we have these high values here and kind of lower values here. And the question is, what if we wanted to make a 3D printed map of this particular storm? One of the things that we would need to do is we would need to change the color ramp. So by default, the primary symbology for this layer is set to color ramp, but we could change that and we could set that to stretch. In this case, we have our color scheme that's going from black to a high value of 160. But it turns out that this 160 value isn't really real. So we're going to put this to minimum and maximum for now. And we could define some custom statistics if we wanted to. What we might want to do is bring out some of the detail that we're seeing here. So we could, for instance, explore and we could click on these values and see what comes up. So this is a stretched pixel value of 125. This is 119. This is 114. Ideally, what we want to do is we want to set this so that our high value is kind of at the top end. So I may have been wrong here. I think maybe 160 is actually legit. Sometimes there are some hidden values in here that don't work out. Now, we could clip this out, right? We could draw a layer around the storm that we wanted to. We could clip out just that portion. I'm not going to go to those links, but I think it's pretty clear how you would do that. So what if we want to make a map of this storm system? Well, all we would need to do is return back to our layout view. We're going to need to zoom in on this. So we're going to jump back to our, we're going to activate our map frame here. And we're going to zoom to this layer, which again was georeferenced improperly, so that's why it's not showing up. But if this were the only map that you brought in, it would probably look fine. But we can zoom in on this area that we care about, like so. Right? So we've got a map that looks something like this. And then all we would need to do is export this back out. So I'm just going to save this for a second. We can exit or oh, there we go. Close activation. That's what we wanted to in the activated map frame tab. So now this is kind of locked in place here. And then we can export this out. So share, export, and we can share this as a PNG. I will just call this storm.png. And back in Cura, we can clear that old one off of the frame, add this file in, and then add our storm system in, changing our values to our kind of normal pieces here. All right. That would produce something that looks like this. Now, it may be that we would want to change these values around a little bit. So in this case, we've got a pretty high shelf going on here. That might be too high. We might not be getting the vertical development that we are really interested in. So we might need to tinker around with those values. So this is a particular station on a particular day. So this is 2017 0906. So I think this is maybe Hurricane Maria or Hurricane Irma. Can't quite remember. If we move this down, there's a shot of the hurricane that looks really good at around, let's see. There we are. 2050. So I'll post this into the link. So this is again an individual station. This is the station at San Juan. on this particular date and time. So we can save this image. So we'll save this into our project directory, and we'll save the world file as well, even though that's not necessarily going to help us, but that's okay. And we're going to bring this data in as well. Okay, so this is the data. We'll bring it in here, and we'll zoom to that data set. And it looks something like this. And we're going to change the color map again to stretch. This is all washed out. That doesn't look any good at all. But if we change these to minimum and maximum, we start to get some real definition of the storm. We could go in and we could do some other tinkering. So we could define these custom statistics. We could change that to -10, for instance, and that's going to have the effect of sort of bringing a base out. The smaller we make this value, the more of a base it's going to have. So it's kind of up to you what you think that number should be. We could zoom in and sort of just do the eye wall if we wanted to. But we'll kind of leave that alone for now. Looks like we have some kind of artifacting going on here, which I'm not too worried about at the moment, but you might be interested in smoothing out. I'm going to set this back down to kind of a normal value or something that I think is going to work pretty well. And we will go back into layout. We're going to activate our map so that we can play around with it. And we're going to zoom to that layer that we just brought in. So here's our map. And we can zoom in and out. You could crop some of these pieces out if you didn't want them there. Okay, so now that we've kind of selected our map and we've got it in about the right place, we go to the Layout tab, we hit Close Activation, and we can export our map out. So we'll go to Share, Export, we'll call this hurricane.png, and we can get a new project and load that data in. Okay, there's our map of the hurricane. As you kind of zoom in here, you'll be able to see some of these pieces. Now, it may be that this is too tall. You can tinker around with the high and low values in here to sort of bring out the detail that you want. Instead of setting it to -50, we could actually enhance the contrast a little bit by changing this to something a little bit taller. All right. This is going to have the effect of sort of squashing out some of that other detail, but it's going to have the effect of bringing out a lot more detail. So we'll call this Hurricane 2. Oops. We may have hit our bug in the program again, so I think what we're going to need to do is restart. We'll try exporting this one more time, but I think we're probably going to need to restart Cura. Okay, so we're just going to close this out and restart it. And bring our data in. And we get something that looks like that. So now we're really focusing on maybe just those high values that we care the most about. How you tinker with this, how you play around with that is entirely up to you. Now, one of the things we didn't talk about was this base layer. So you can see that there's a square here, but that square won't print out. It actually has a thickness of 0, which you can kind of see if you take a side view. But what happens if we do want this to be there? If we just printed this hurricane without any base on it, we would lose a lot of the pieces, the disconnected pieces, and we might want to keep those. So what you can do to keep those is when you're doing your import, you can set a base height. So by default, the base height is set to 1. We could set that a little bit higher. Usually something between 1 and 2 works pretty well. I'm going to set the height of the whole thing to be 20 millimeters. And we'll set the whole width to be a little bit higher. We can hit OK. Okay. And now what we've done is we've created this little thick base layer that will print out. So the whole base will get printed out and everything will get printed out on top. And that's why that some of the stuff is going to be a little bit clearer. Let's see if we can arrange this without making too many errors here. Sometimes the visualization within the Cura software isn't fantastic, so it can be a little bit difficult. Remember that you can always, once the slicing is done, you should be able to save to a file. So this should be done in just a second. We'll wait for that to finish. Okay, that's done. We can save this to a file. We're going to save this as a binary STL. And there's our file that we made, and we can open that with 3D Builder, just like any other file. You can put that on a USB stick and you can bring that in. This we can really start to get into some of the details and the structure of the storm. You can see the eye wall and the kind of ringed nature of it. There's your demonstration of how to apply this to non-elevation data. And of course, just like we did with terrain, anything that you can visualize in 3 dimensions or with a color ramp, you can print. So you could print population, you could print any kind of other thematic variable that you're interested in. We worked mostly with raster data here, but the same kind of process would apply to vector data as well. Lots and lots and lots of applications for this. So I hope you'll get a chance to try some of these things out, and if you do, let me know how it goes. Thanks. Bye.